Alright, so I've decided to make a IUD review because I know that when I was going through the transition of birth control to an IUD, I was doing all this crazy research and I couldn't find any like strong answers. I just found a lot of horror stories, and it's really scary when you don't really have any options like me. So I was on birth control for a really long time, probably like 5 years maybe, until I decided to switch. I was diagnosed with oral migraines, and basically me being on birth control, it was raising my blood pressure, and it like put me at a really high risk for a stroke. So I had to kind of veer away from birth control. So I started looking at like other options of birth control. So I decided to opt for an IUD, or at least start researching it, and my doctor told me that she thought that that was the best option for me. I obviously went home and started researching everything. I was like, holy shit, I'm gonna die, basically. I found a lot of horror stories. There was a lot of really scary things that you think, oh my god, this is gonna happen to me. What if it gets lodged, and what if it da 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 da? There's a lot of things to worry about when getting an IUD, so it really is something that you kind of have to opt for yourself. You have to make that decision for you and like be okay with the risks and the factors that all come with an IUD. I've actually had my IUD for about 6 months now. I'm on Kyleena. It's a hormonal kind of IUD because I didn't want a copper one. My doctor also advised me against it because of like how young I am, and my periods were really heavy, and copper IUDs tend to make periods a little bit more like moderate. So I wanted something that would kind of like calm my body down, but also prevent me from getting pregnant, and also just like help me overall. I'm basically just gonna give you guys my opinion on it, like my experience. This is no way me saying like, oh, well, this didn't happen to me, so it can't happen to you. This is just like my experience, basically. It's definitely the easiest form of birth control I can say for myself. So I got my IUD in January, and I went home. I was freaking out. I was doing all this research. My mom was kind of freaking out. She was like, it's your decision, like, ultimately, but let's maybe look into this a little bit more, because we've definitely heard a lot of like really bad things about IUDs, which I can assume everybody has, because really like that's kind of what you make reviews on. Like if you had a good experience at a restaurant, you're not gonna go on Google out of your way and be like, oh my god, this was amazing. If you had a bad experience, you're gonna write a horrible review that's like, holy shit, this destroyed my life. So that's kind of, I feel like, what's happening with an IUD. There's a lot of girls that have had horrible, awful stuff happen to them with IUDs, and there's a lot of girls that don't really speak up because their life is like fine with it. I'm actually on Kyleena. It's a kind of a more docile IUD. A lot of younger women opt for it. It's a hormonal IUD, and it lasts for 5 years. So I'm actually covered with health benefits, so my IUD didn't cost anything, but I actually think it's a pretty expensive form of birth control, but it lasts the longest. So it's definitely worth the money. Getting my IUD inserted was something I was horrified for, because everything told me like, it's gonna fucking hurt, and it did. It hurt pretty bad for me, but that's also with pain tolerance, because I've heard women say that like it's not that bad, or like holy shit, it's awful. For me, it was just kind of like moderate. It was like, ow, it sucked. My doctor was really understanding, really kind. I took some Advil, I think, before. I took like 800 milligrams of Advil, and it still hurt. So kind of prepare yourself for a little bit of discomfort, I guess is how I would word it. So I actually brought my best friend with me to come get it inserted. My doctor was super understanding. It's really good to like surround yourself with people who are positive about it, and they're like just there to like keep you happy and healthy. If your doctor is kind of hesitant about IUDs, or like not knowledge on it, definitely take a step back, either talk to a new doctor or just like opt out of that. I actually had an issue with, my doctor wanted a student to do their first IUD on me, and at first I was like, yeah, okay, sure. Like I was obviously very like reluctant to do it. I was going to let them, thank God. Something went wrong and my IUD didn't come in the mail in time for my appointment. So my doctor ended up doing it herself, which I felt 10 times more comfortable with, and I realize now that I definitely should have said something and I should have spoken up. I could definitely tell that this student or resident that was going to do my IUD, he didn't really know a lot about it, and I could definitely tell that he was nervous, I was nervous, it was his first one, and I just really, really, really am so glad that the world worked in the way that it did, and my doctor ended up doing it herself. Basically, I got there, I was freaking out a little bit, kind of nervous. I laid back on the table, got everything sorted out. She pulled out my IUD and showed me what it looked like. Like, she let me feel the strings, because a thing that you gotta do with IUDs is consistently every couple months or so, get on up in there, feel your strings, make sure everything is okay, because if you can't feel them, or if they're tangled up, they're longer or they're shorter, something's probably a little bit off. My doctor let me feel what the strings would feel like and get me familiar with what's happening in the process of an IUD. So basically, how the IUD stops you from getting pregnant is that it thins out the lining of your endometrium, so like kind of your uterus wall lining. It makes it hard for eggs or fertilized eggs to kind of stick in there, and I think it like thickens a cervix mucus or something like that. So it's harder for sperm to like actually get up to the egg. Double check me on it, do your own research, because I could be wrong. She started putting my IUD in. Once it was fully in, it did hurt a lot. I felt a lot of pressure. It was just like, it was like a really, really, really bad period cramp, which like, oh my gosh, I don't think I have really intense periods, and it sucked. It was like one constant period cramp. It like actually made me vocally like emit noise and be like, holy shit, that hurt. For the next like couple days, the next couple weeks, she told me that like I'd be cramping a little bit, and I did. The cramps afterwards were probably the worst part. They would kind of come in little bursts, but they hurt. It felt like a really, really, really heavy period. You would be spotting for a few days, so I wore liners for the first 2 weeks maybe, to make sure that like I didn't stain some nice underwear I have. The cramps went away a little bit with Tylenol. Like whatever you usually take to help cramps is what helped for me. Basically, I just kind of curled up in a ball and was like, ow. I had a lot of pressure on my back, but I usually have really, really, really back heavy periods. So that's kind of where my cramps were. For the first week or so that you just get your IUD in, it's really, really, really crucial to stay clean. Don't put anything up there. Try your best to refrain from having sex, because your IUD can get infected, which is horrifying. And I'm like kind of a hypochondriac with that. I was trying to be very clean, like keep away from everything. Definitely the first 2 days, refrain from putting anything in there. Leave it alone. I know it'll hurt, it'll sting, it'll whatever. Leave it alone. Then up to a week is when you're starting to feel a little bit better. You're like, maybe I can have sex, it'll be fine. Try not to, but if you absolutely have to, definitely use a condom. Like, I cannot stress that enough. You should try to let it heal for about a month and like refrain from sex, but I didn't. Within like the second week, I was like, all right, we're fine. Now, something you have to kind of be aware of is if your partner can feel your strings or not. Your doctor will ask you on your next checkup, which they should schedule something with you for the next month or so. They'll ask, can your partner feel your strings? Do I need to cut them? Because the strings are basically for removal, so they can only make them so short or so long. I was totally fine. My partner couldn't feel anything. He was a-okay. Now, my strings, I think they're 8 inches. I'm not completely sure, but I think that's around how long they are, and they're totally fine. I don't even know if he even knows what he's looking for. He's just like, yeah, vagina, which, understandable. For the next couple months, I was having off and on cramps. And with Kyleena, actually, I just stopped completely having my period, which is awesome. Now, everybody's body reacts differently, so I'm not saying 100% you're gonna lose your period or like you're gonna have a crazy period. Everybody's body's different. Your uterus is really trying to get used to some random fucking foreign object stuck right on up there, like emitting these chemicals or sperm killing robots to fucking laser up your pussy. So still to this day, I'm only 6 months in, obviously, so I probably have a lot to learn. I still get cramps once in a while. However, I haven't had any issues other than that, which cramping usually tends to last up to 6 months, but really expect to be pretty crampy. For me, it was a lot of pain in my back, which is, like I said before, I'm very period heavy in my back. So like I said before, you actually do have to feel your strings every couple of months. You gotta thunder and lightning, get yourself up in there. I do it when I'm in the shower just so everything's clean, like I'm standing, it's a fine position. They're hard to find at first, like especially if it's your first time doing it. You don't know what you're really looking for even though you have felt the strings before. For me, it just feels like really, really, really thin, like plastic strings, kind of like plastic cylinders more so, I would say. Recently, I actually had an issue and I went to feel my strings and they felt longer and I was freaking out. I was like, holy shit, my IUD's displaced, because I was actually getting cramps and stuff, so I was losing my mind, being a hypochondriac. I was like, I have to call my doctor right now. And with the whole pandemic going on, it was scary for me because I'm also immunosuppressed. I had psoriasis really bad, so I am on Stelara, which suppresses my immune system, so I basically, like, my skin clears up. I didn't want to go to a doctor's office because I was horrified that I'm going to get coronavirus. So I called my doctor, I told her, like, they feel longer. They absolutely did feel longer. She told me my strings basically were, like, folded up, which can happen, so they were like twirled all up in there, so when I went to feel my strings, they felt a little longer when I probably kind of moved them out of place. Definitely know what you're getting into because it is a really big decision and it's something that, like, you don't know if it can change your life and you don't know if your doctor's gonna put it in properly. Like, anything can go wrong. I'm not saying that to scare you, I'm just saying that to pre-warn you, be ready to feel some type of pain. It wasn't awful, it was bearable. I'm probably, like, over-exaggerating a little bit. It did hurt. It was bearable, like, it was fine. I got on a bus and walked home right after. My doctor actually asked me to put in my IUD while I was on my period, and I was like, while I'm on my what? I'm like, are you sure about that? Basically, if you put an IUD in while you're on your period, it works immediately, rather than waiting 7 days for the vagina melting scenario to get on going down there. IUDs are pretty hassle-free. You kind of just stick it on up there and hit the road. Like, you don't really think about it often. Well, you can't feel it. You can't tell that it's there. It's a really good option, especially for people like me who were having issues with birth control, or people who get depressed from birth control, people who gain weight from birth control, people who, like, are just struggling with all that stuff. I've heard of people who get the injection and they love it. I've heard of people who use condoms and they love it. There's so many different things, so many different ways that you can prevent getting pregnant. IUD is it's a really good one. I'm really thoroughly enjoying it. No, IUDs do not prevent STDs. So if you're sleeping with someone who you don't think is tested, you don't think is safe, you can never be 100% sure. You can't be like, oh, well, there's not green gunk on his penis, or there's not green gunk in her mouth. You really never know. Like, STDs can be dormant, they can be invisible, you just really have to be safe. There's a lot of stigmas with IUDs. People think that you might get cancer from it, people think that you can be infertile from it, people think that you can't get it removed within the certain time frame that your IUD has. There's no links to being infertile, my doctor said that she has had someone get it removed and get pregnant the next month. You can still have kids after you have an IUD, so fear not. Like, I know I really want to be a mother, and I was like freaking out. I was like, will it destroy my ovaries? Oh my god. Like, I need to get pregnant eventually. You can, and most likely you will if there's not any other issues going on. You can still get pregnant using an IUD. You can get pregnant using anything, really. Like, the chance is always there, and even though it is 99% effective, you can still get pregnant. When you get an IUD, you can actually get it taken out within like any time frame. So if I get it in 1 week and then I'm like, hey, I don't like this, I want to get it removed, you can get it removed that very day. I really do love it. I think it's a great birth control technique. Like, I'm 18 and I had to do all my research on it first to make sure like I knew what I was putting in my body and what I was bracing myself to possibly go through if the outcome wasn't that good. Really talk to your doctor, and don't be embarrassed to ask questions, because they will answer them, and you should be able to have a normal conversation with them. If you are having intense cramping, if you are feeling sick, if you think it's infected, there's like green discharge, or like if you notice like a difference in your discharge, that's when you gotta kind of worry about it. Like, there's an odor. You just really have to be careful in those first couple months, making sure that like you're clean, make sure your fingers are clean before you go up in there. I also just wanted to talk about women who do have their periods, like things you can use like pads and tampons and diva cups and whatever you use for your period. Before I used an IUD and before I didn't have a period, I was using diva cups faithfully. They were the absolute best option for me. Pads I got chafing with, and tampons really just, I don't like the disposable factor about it. I don't like being in my boyfriend's house and being like, I gotta remove this disgusting blood-soaked sponge and put it in their garbage. Like, I don't know, it just weirded me out a little bit. So I switched to a diva cup, and it was amazing. It literally changed my life. Like, it's definitely not as gross as people tend to think it is. There's a lot of stigmas about it. It's basically a cup that you kind of fold in, it like rests in your cervix, and the blood from your uterus will drip down into it, and then every 12 hours you switch it out, dump it in the toilet. There's no blood on the outside of the cup. There's really not as much blood as you think. I was preparing for like Friday the 13th. I was ready for it to be a massacre. I was like, oh my god, this is disgusting. Why am I even trying this? But once I did try it, I really enjoyed it. You can sleep with it in. It lasts 12 hours. You can do cartwheels, handstands, swimming, whatever the hell you want. It was amazing, and I really loved it. It does take a little bit of getting used to, so you should put it in there for like a day or two before your period, just to like kind of get used to the feeling. I don't know why I'm going on a rant about diva cups. I'm so sorry. This is an IUD video. I love them a lot. When I got my IUD, my doctor told me that if you use things like tampons or diva cups, you can actually pull your strings out and like dislodge the IUD if you accidentally grab it, or if a string gets kind of messed up with the strain, or like the braid of a tampon, you can accidentally pull your IUD out, and that freaked me the fuck out. I was like, hell no. Thank god I just stopped getting a period. I don't have to use them anyways. I always just keep liners on deck. But I kind of stopped using diva cups, and for my first period that I had, because I did have like a very small period for the first like month or so with my IUD, I used pads. I just let it go. You kind of got to be prepared and just know that like you can still use a diva cup and you can still use a tampon. You just really have to be careful with it. You really have to make sure you're not grabbing strings. Make sure you're like more aware of when you're doing it, because I know I get frazzled and I'll be like, let me just rip my diva cup out and then end up pulling my IUD out with it. So that kind of freaked me out a little bit. Another question I had was about yeast infections. I asked my doctor, I was like, what happens if I get a yeast infection? Will it infect my IUD? Like, I didn't really know a lot about the bacteria. Basically, a yeast infection, if you don't know, is an off balance in the good and the bad bacteria in your vagina. It's like the pH balance is basically just off, and it'll just be like too much bad bacteria over good. I was nervous. I didn't know like what to expect if I had one, because most women get yeast infections at least once in their life. Like I've had one before, so I didn't know whether or not to be worried about it. Basically, it doesn't really change anything. You can still use Monistat or like whatever cream or pill you use if you have a yeast infections or if you get yeast infections often. You can still use them. It doesn't change anything. It treats it like normal. I am absolutely not a doctor, so if you have very serious concerns about something that's happening with you, definitely talk to a doctor and do your research. The IUD for me has been amazing. I love it. Even after my 5 years is up and I don't want to have kids by that time, I would definitely get it again. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, and you want to hear my opinion on it or my experience from it, please let me know. I will definitely help. Thanks for watching, and I hope that this helped you guys.